Welcome to our tour of the spring evening sky and some of the bright planets that can be seen in the morning sky. My name is Peter Davis, the director of the Lamar Bruno Figuera Planetarium here at TAMIU in Laredo, Texas. Astronomy is really a perfect hobby at this time of social distancing because it's fun and fascinating and relaxing, and it can be done with those in your family. You don't necessarily need a good telescope, but you can use a pair of binoculars. Binoculars are very helpful to find many objects in the sky, and there's many things that can be found up in the night sky, many fascinating things that are seen in the sky. Thousands of years ago, men looked up at the sky and they drew imaginary lines between the stars. So they might draw a line between these three stars and say that that's a triangle shape. Or they may say this four stars form a box shape. And so they drew these lines, imaginary lines between them, and they made these shapes. And these shapes were patterned after objects that they saw around them, animals, and many fanciful creatures that were in their mythology. And one of the most famous of these, and these are what we call constellations today, but one of the most famous of these that we can see in the sky is seen right here, and it has one, two, three, four stars that form a bowl shape, and one, two, three stars that form a handle shape. We, of course, call this constellation the Big Dipper, and it's one of the most recognizable shapes that there are in the sky. And so it has four stars in a bowl again, they mark a bowl, and three stars in a handle. Now, the Greeks, who named this constellation a long time ago, they called it Ursa Major because they thought that this looked like a bear. Now, it takes some real imagination to see a bear in this shape, but I'm going to turn on some outlines, the way they drew these outlines, and this shows the outline of the Big Dipper that we see. And of course, it gets this name of the Big Dipper because of the shape where it looks like a soup ladle, where this is the bowl and this would be the handle. But to get that shape of a bear, you have to really use your imagination here. They see these faint stars here, kind of like the face of the bear. He's upside down at this time of the year. And this would be the face of the bear. And the front legs come out where these really faint stars are here. And the back legs of the bear come out to his paws right here, his back paws. And these four stars are on the main body of the bear. And these three stars that were in the handle, the Greeks thought that that was a big, long tail. They saw it as a tail that was all stretched out behind that bear. They tell a legend about this constellation of the bear, Ursa Major, that he had a wrestling match with the strong man Hercules. Now, Hercules was extremely strong, but also the bear was big and strong. And they wrestled all evening until Hercules looked up and he saw that the stars were starting to come out. And so he was tired of wrestling with the bear. So he reached around behind the bear and yanked his small little tail. And then the bear jumped up and he grabbed the bear by that tail and he swung him up in the sky and he swung him around and around. And when he ended up in the sky, he threw him up into the sky. He got his tail all stretched out into a big long tail that we see in the three stars in the end of the handle of this constellation of the Big Dipper, or as we said, the Greeks called it Ursa Major. But it's very interesting that also in our country, here in America, in the northern part of our country, there's a Native American tribe called the Iroquois Nation, and they looked at this part of the sky and they also thought that it was a bear, but they thought that these four stars on the bowl were the bear and that these were three Native American hunters chasing the bear. The closest one had a bow and arrow, and he's going to try to shoot the bear when they get close enough to him because they wanted to make a meal out of that bear. The last one had the fire stick and the firewood to cook the bear with. And the middle one, they said, carried a big pot, and that was to cook the bear in, of course. And they said a good test of how good your eyesight was is could you look up at the bear and these three Native American hunters that are chasing him, and could you see that the middle star, if we zoom in, is actually two stars. And with the unaided eye, you can see that it's two stars. It's Mizar. If I come in even closer, you'll see that the labels will come on. It's Mizar and Alcor. Now, these two stars are what are called double stars. So if I move back out so you can see where they are, to find them, they're in the Big Dipper, where this is the bowl of the Big Dipper up here, and the handle, you go to the middle star of the handle where the bent part of the handle is. That's where Mizar and Alcor are. With a good pair of binoculars, you can see that it's definitely two stars. And if your eyesight's pretty good, you can see that it's two stars. And actually, the brighter of those two stars is also a double star. Now, in the sky, if you go out and look at the sky and you see all these stars in the sky, more than 50% of all the stars in the skies are actually double stars. So this is fairly normal for there to be two stars that are fairly close together in space, and we call those double stars. But most of the ones we see that are double stars out there, you have to have a telescope to be able to see that there's two stars in there. And those are interesting things to look at in a little telescope. So they're called Mizar and Alcor there in the constellation. So let's zoom back out the way you'd see it in the sky. Turn it around. The north is at the bottom again. You just look for that shape of the Big Dipper, and you can find that Mizar and Alcor in the middle of the handle of the Big Dipper. Now, it's interesting that was two stars, that in ancient Arabia, they called it the horse and the rider in their language, these two stars, because they saw that it was two stars also. Now, first, let's look at some things that can be seen if you do have a telescope that you can see in the sky. Now, we're going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to look for an object that's here. It's a very faint galaxy, and it's kind of off this handle of the Big Dipper. If you look closely, if you have a pair of binoculars, you'll see a row of very faint little stars going in a row. And it's close to the end of that. It's a little further and then over a little bit. And you can see it looks like a faint, in a pair of binoculars, like a faint smudge in the sky. But if you zoom in and at a telescope where you could look at it fairly carefully, it's actually an entire galaxy. Now, this galaxy is called the Pinwheel Galaxy. And the Pinwheel Galaxy is a special kind of galaxy that we call spiral galaxies, and there's more spiral galaxies than any other kind of galaxy in the universe. And they're called spiral galaxies because they have these arms in the disk of the galaxy that have a spiral shape. And this is a picture of it, this one, and it's called the Pinwheel Galaxy. Now, we can look at a picture of this galaxy taken by the Hubble. And of course, the Hubble gives a very spectacular view, and you can see how these arms wrap around the center of the galaxy now. Now, our galaxy, the Milky Way, has over 100 billion stars in it. And this galaxy is a fairly large galaxy, and it has quite a few, many 100 billion stars in it, galaxy. Now, of course, in the sky, what you'll see is it'll look, because it's fairly faint, unless you have a telescope, it's going to look like a faint smudge in the sky. You can see it right here. And where is that? If we zoom out a little bit, near the handle of the Big Dipper. Now, there's also another galaxy that can be seen, and it's a little easier to see in a pair of binoculars, and it's off the handle too, but it's on the other side of the handle. Now, here's the Big Dipper again. I'm still zoomed in quite a bit. And this time you go the other way from this, and you look for a triangle of stars here. And I'm going to zoom in here. You look for there, and there's a faint fuzzy patch there. And there's a galaxy you can see right here. Back out just a little bit. A faint fuzzy patch that's seen. And this galaxy that you see there is called the Whirlpool Galaxy. Now let me show you a picture of the Whirlpool Galaxy taken with the Hubble. It is a very interesting galaxy because it's where two galaxies have collided with each other. And as they collide, what happens is, because the stars are separated so far from each other, they can actually go through in between each other in space, and they don't hit each other, but the gravity disturbs the shape of the galaxy. So you have the main galaxy, and you see these very distinct spiral arms coming out, places where stars are forming. And the stars forming out of them, many of them are hot blue young stars. And so blue is a very hot stars. They're about 30,000 degrees. And there's a big long spiral arm here, like a bridge connecting it to the original nucleus of the other galaxy. But the other galaxy is completely distorted out of shape, so you only see this arm left of that galaxy and its nucleus over here. And so they call this the Whirlpool Galaxy because it looks like a whirlpool of things are being sucked down into the middle of it. Now, if we go to the other side of this constellation and we select the two stars that are in the bowl that are away from the handle, and we go from the bottom of the bowl to the top of the bowl. Remember, it's upside down at this time of year. And then we go 5 times the distance between these two stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We come to a very special star. Now, this special star is called Polaris, or the North Star. This North Star is a very important star. And the reason why it's very important is, if I get rid of that and we go out a little bit, it's right above the direction north. Now, no matter what time you go out and look at the sky, the North Star is always directly above your northern horizon. So if you ever get lost at night, you're out, like let's say you're in Big Ben and you're not sure where your directions are, you can find your directions by going to the Big Dipper, follow the pointer stars, they're called. They point to the North Star, and then you know that's the direction north. And you can do that if you're anywhere in the northern hemisphere of the Earth. Now, that is in another constellation, which you can see here, which is marked out. And it has 1, 2, 3 stars in a handle, and 1, 2, 3, 4 stars in a bowl shape. Now, if we zoom in a little bit on this constellation is the constellation that is called the Little Dipper. Now, we talked about the Big Dipper up there, of course, which is up here, and that was a large bear. And so, as you might imagine, this Little Dipper was called Ursa Minor by the Greeks, and that's because they thought that it was a small bear. And I guess big bears with big long tails have little bears with big long tails. The Little Dipper has a tail there, but it takes a very large amount of imagination to see the bear in the Little Dipper. But in the Little Dipper, it's kind of hard to find because a lot of people can find this shape, the shape of the Big Dipper in the sky. It's a very recognizable shape, and most of the stars are pretty bright in the Big Dipper. But in the Little Dipper, you can follow those two stars as we did to the North Star, and it's right about second magnitude. Now, you think because this is such an important star that shows this direction, it'd be really bright in the sky, but it isn't. And so that makes it a little harder to see this star. But once you follow the pointers, you can find that star, and you probably will notice the two stars in the end of the bowl here because they're a little bit brighter. So in ancient times, they called those the guardians because they said during the night, these stars were guarding the pole star, and they went around in counterclockwise circles around the pole stars. So they would go around the pole star during the night guarding, so they called them the guardians. And the reason for that is it was very hard if there's any kind of haze or you're near any kind of lights in the city to see these 4 stars in the middle because they're very faint. Like for instance, this one's 4th magnitude here, and so is this one. And that means it's about 20 to 30 times fainter than the 2nd magnitude star. And then this one on the bottom here is actually 5th magnitude. You can see it's 4.95, which means it's 5th magnitude. And so to find this constellation, you have to remember that the 4 stars in the middle are very faint, and it has a backwards handle compared to the handle of the Big Dipper. And that'll make it a little easier for you to find this constellation. Now, this star, the North Star called Polaris, is actually pretty far from us, 432 light years away. We measure in light years in astronomy. And a light year is not a measure of time, but it is something that measures. So if you let light that goes 186,286 miles a second in a curved line around the Earth 7 times in 1 second, it can go from here to the sun in 8 minutes. But it takes the light from this star 432 years to get here. Now, the nearest star to us that's not our sun, it's called Alpha Centauri. It takes the light from that star 4 years to come here. Now, that light going at that speed, 186,000 miles a second approximately, takes 4 years, and that distance is about almost 40 trillion miles away for the closest star that's not our sun. So a lot of things we see that are in the evening sky and the morning sky during the night are quite far away. Now I want to look at something in the west, and then I would like to go to the morning sky. Now in the west, I have the labels on, as you can see. The brightest thing you're going to notice in the west, low in the west, is this really bright star-like object, and actually it's a planet, and you can see it's the planet Venus. Now Venus is very bright because Venus is covered completely with clouds. Matter of fact, its atmosphere is about 95 times the mass of the atmosphere of the Earth, and these clouds reflect the light very well. Now in a small telescope it shows a very yellowish color because the color of the clouds are yellow, and its magnitude is minus 4.7. Venus is minus 4.5, which means it's 100 times brighter than the brightest stars that we see in the sky that we see here. I'd like to go to the morning sky now. I'm going to do that by turning our direction to the direction east. So I'm going to roll around. And by the way, I'm using a free software that's called Stellarium. So you can load down this for free, and you can use this software just like I am. Now, but what I want to do is let some time go by. So what I'm going to do is speed up time here. And what we notice is as we speed up time that new stars start to come up above the horizon. If we're on look the opposite way, if you turn around and look the opposite way outside, those stars are going down in the west. So they go down in the west and they're coming up in the east. And the Big Dipper went out of our field of view. It's still there. And if we go just a little bit more, we're going to come to right here in the morning to 5 o'clock in the morning. We'll stop at 5 a.m. in the morning. And that's right here. I'm actually at 5:15. Now, I'm going to turn the sky a little bit to the southeast. We're looking towards the direction southeast. And this is in the morning sky at 5 a.m. Now there's an interesting constellation seen right over here. It looks kind of like a fishhook shape, and it's called Scorpius. And Scorpius is a summer constellation. And next to it, there are three bright objects up along here, and they look like stars in a row here, but they are not stars. Each of these is a planet. And the first one is Jupiter. Now Jupiter is the brightest by far of the three, so look for this very bright object. It's near this constellation of Scorpius, and this is Jupiter. Is an interesting thing to see. If you even have a very small telescope, that you can see that Jupiter, as I zoom in, it'll show a little bit of detail on the planet itself, which is the largest of all the planets in the solar system. It's what's called a gas giant. And then there are four little dots that are moons that are going around Jupiter. And each night they're on a different side. Now it happens this night that I'm doing this, which is in the middle of April, that Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, the four moons of Jupiter, are all on one side. But you need a telescope to see that. So it's a very interesting object to look at in these months of April and May, because they're fairly prominent in the early morning sky. Now next to that, to the left, is another object that's not quite as bright, but it's still pretty bright. And that's my favorite thing to see through a telescope, and that's the planet Saturn. So through a small telescope, you see the disk of the planet, which is also a gas giant, and you see the rings. If you have an even bigger telescope, if you have a really big telescope, it shows a lot of detail of the rings and on the planet and of some of the bright moons. Now, there's one more planet here in the morning sky. If we back out, we had Jupiter, Saturn, and all the way down here in this constellation here is the planet Mars. Now, Mars has a very distinct orangey red color. And Mars was named after the Roman god of war because it had a red color, and they associated that red color of the planet with war and pestilence and bloodshed. But Mars is probably more like our planet than any other planet in our solar system, at least. The problem with Mars is a very small planet and it's not very close to us. Its closest approach is about 50 million miles away when we see it. And so in a small telescope, it doesn't show a lot of detail. It kind of looks like this. Mars thing to see. And there's lots about the planet Mars on the internet, so you can check it out on the internet. NASA has a lot of pictures from the surface of that planet, more than any other planet in our solar system. Well, I thank you for coming to our short tour of some of the things that could be seen in the evening sky in the north, and then these 3 bright planets that you can check out in the morning sky. I thank you for coming and have a great day and stay safe.